I'd like to thank Jim, and I'd like to thank the OFL and the Durham Council for putting this together. I think it's critically important. It would be, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here for coming. It's a brutal morning, so what? There's a very, very important and critical issue that stands before all of us. And Chris touched on it, and Irene touched on it, and I could say, hi Bill, I didn't see you come in. And there's a lot of faces in this crowd that we are tremendously thankful to, because you've been tremendously supportive of the United Way. And I could stand here and talk about whether or not funding is down 25% at this agency, or whether or not there's a 40% increase in demand at the distress center, and there's an increase of about 40% in calls that are coming from men, and whether or not there's a 25% monthly increase in necessity for services at the food bank. Those are all statistics, but this has nothing whatsoever to do with statistics. And I think the fact that you're standing here on a cold morning, some of you on wet grass, speaks very well to the fact that you know that this is not at all about statistics. This is a much more serious issue. It's an issue about human dignity, and it's an issue about the kind of society that we want our children and our grandchildren to participate in, and maybe our grandparents, because they're the ones whose quality of life is going to be impacted if we continue to have some of the decision makers make the decisions that they're making. I couldn't agree more with what Irene was talking about a little bit earlier in the context of the fraud that we have all been exposed to as where wealth comes from, and whether or not it's created on Wall Street, and we should all be concerned about international trade deficits and all the rest of this stuff. We are in the business, and the most satisfying thing for me, working with United Way and having some of the support that comes from the organizations that you work with, is that we are in the human capital business. No society can be built upon anything other than strong human capital. Period. Full stop. You cannot beggar education services. You cannot beggar healthcare services. You cannot beggar support for the people who are least advantaged. When I was at U of T, most of the stuff I listened to I've forgotten, but one of the things that I listened to came out of a guy's mouth named John Kenneth Galbraith. And I will never ever forget that he said to me one time, you know, the most important way that we can measure wealth in society, it has nothing to do with GDP. It has nothing to do with interest rates. It has nothing to do with the debt versus savings ratios. It has everything to do with how well you treat the people who are least advantaged. Period. That is wealth in a society. And that is the job for all of us. That is the job that Chris was working on. I saw Sika, I didn't see him come in. And that's exactly what Irene was talking about. We must stop the race to the lowest common denominator. This has nothing to do with whether or not and our contributions are down, no question about it. One of the things that often fell through the cracks when they were talking about the dislocation in the manufacturing sector in Ontario was the fact that we got over $1 million from the men and women who worked in the auto sector in this community, including those in General Motors. Most of it, obviously from General Motors. Certainly those contributions are going to be extraordinarily difficult to find elsewhere, no question about it. But we're going to do it. We're going to do it because people like you understand that when you help people who are least advantaged, you enrich the entire community. The way you help yourself is by helping others. It's not exactly an original idea. And we've got to stop the race to the lowest common denominator. I was talking to Chris a little bit earlier. It's a true story. I thought it was terribly ironic. I read an article in the New York Times about China was complaining about world trade policies because Canon moved 400 jobs and Nissan moved 2,000 jobs to Laos because they were complaining about the wage structure in China. If anybody doesn't think that that's a problem, and if anybody doesn't think that we have to stop that, then we need a correction in our gyroscope. And the fact that you're here today, and the fact that the OFL is doing this, and the fact that the Labour Council is doing this, and the fact that there are so many people, in my opinion, that I speak to almost on a daily basis, who all of a sudden, it doesn't matter, it's not just a political issue, they can come from all political stripes. They say, you know something, you're absolutely right. We have to change the gyroscope that we all operate on. We have to care a little bit about people who are less advantaged. I could go on, but I'm not supposed to. No. I'm a campaign director for the United Way, and we're grateful for your contributions. They're going to be more critical than they've ever been in the past. There are some wonderful organizations in this community, and your contributions are going to get to the street, and we hope in the coming years that you keep that in mind. We're tremendously grateful to some of you who provided leadership. I'm not supposed to get into politics. Thank you very much.